Order. Okay, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is doing a study of the Canada Revenue Agency's efforts to combat tax avoidance and evasion. And we have with us today as a witness is Alain Duneau, who's a researcher with the Réseau pour la Justice Fiscale Québec. Welcome, Alain, and I might point out in the beginning, I think you are aware of the, could we have a little order here, please? I think, Alain, you are aware of the previous meeting and a certain amount of restraint that is put on the committee as a result of the sub judice convention that is under our rules. But having said that, we certainly welcome you here, and whatever you can add to our study that looks at combating tax avoidance and evasion, welcome, and thank you very much for coming.
C'est moi qui vous remercie pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm delighted to be able to discuss some issues with you this morning. I'm a researcher at the Réseau pour la Justice Fiscale Québec that's interested in the fight against tax havens and that has associations with various comparable unities throughout the world, the Tax Justice and Network in London, and also with the Canadians for Tax Fairness that you have heard from. I'm also the author of a few works on tax havens that has been translated as Canada, a New Tax Haven. And I have also, in collaboration with André Leroux, a professor who you heard from last week, I drafted for the chèques aux fiscaux, which is designed for federal legislators in Quebec and which was translated as solutions within our reach. You have samples of this article here. It shows that Canada cannot act on its own, and we're wondering why Canada is a country that is not taking action. Moreover, I have a PhD from a university in philosophy, and I'm director of research at the philosophy faculty at the University of Paris, and I've dealt with the issue of tax havens. This whole issue calls for a multidisciplinary approach, and this is backed by various legal aspects and political scientists as well. With respect to the administrative and legal aspects of the problem, with respect to tax havens, a lot has been written and said by Mr. Archer, Caulfield, Dennis Hollett, and Denis Laroux last week. Particularly, the CRA has sent out a bad signal when it negotiates, to lower sanctions for people who are getting around or dealing with tax avoidance or evasion, and it costs less to come up with negotiations with people who have committed fraud than getting down to the bottom of the problem and coming up with a legal approach. And that is the sad joke put forward by Charlie Chaplin. If you kill 1 million people, you're a hero. If you kill one person, you're a criminal. We can apply this to our whole tax regime. The problem lies in the fact that the Act itself, whose mission is to benefit us, is not negotiable. We're taking a boutique approach to it. We're counting on the fact that we have to ensure that the Act is enforced. And I think that over the past few months, we have seen that a lot of people and companies have been able to make transactions without any penalties on amounts that were described as being, or identified as being to the tune of, or identified as transfers. I'm not going to get into the legal aspect of this, but that being said, what I would suggest here is that we adopt a complementary approach aside from the technical issues that are legal and the administrative processes that are discussed. We're talking about looking at tax avoidance in diplomatic terms. We have to look at the very structure of the problem and not just domestic issues. We mustn't look at it as being an issue that can be negotiated away or raised within a particular legislation. In Canada, we get the impression that the national executive and the public agencies have not publicly given any deep thought to the whole global issue of tax havens. And to point this out, when the Panama Papers issue hit the papers, throughout the world, day by day, we saw people getting angry and angrier about this issue. And the leaders of the countries, such as Barack Obama, Angela Merkel, François Hollande, and so on and so forth. In Canada, however, despite some statements made to the Prime Minister, it was turned over to Minister Le Boutillier, who is supposed to represent the government on this issue. And it was said that it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Finance who, in fact, are dealing with the issue. And why is this the case? Because the accommodating states, when it comes to tax havens and tax-free zones, are not states like other states. They are adversaries of the states where there is rule of law. They often have tax havens that are aimed at neutralizing the laws that exist elsewhere in countries where rule of law is at play. So they're an adversary of our countries. It's a way for these states to hijack the whole system in their house. And I would conclude by saying that when it comes to tax havens and accommodating states and the way they view law, these states enable, think of Panama, Hong Kong, Bermuda, and there are others. They enable, using their system of law, the creation of entities such as exempted companies, such as international business companies and holdings, which ensure that these companies pay absolutely no tax on their capital assets. There is no rules governing regarding the monitoring by the state of the people involved, providing that the capital held by these entities has no impact on the domestic life of the country. So that means an exempting company can be created here, it won't pay tax on its incomes, providing that it doesn't carry out any activities on its territory. What does that mean? The accommodating state legislates on assets, activities, and players throughout the world, except those that are in their own country. And as such, a government, such as the Canadian government, through its diplomatic corps, through its Department of Foreign Affairs, are telling these states that this goes beyond the prerogatives of their very sovereignty, because they can't even, the consequences of this is very serious, because we're talking about billions of dollars that we're losing in tax havens, in tax avoidance. There are all kinds of austerity plans that are now being carried out through various countries, but it has an impact on them. And the government can't really play its legal role as the way that it carries out activities with respect to these entities. And that's what I would like to underscore here, this problem, which is of a political nature and a diplomatic nature.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deneau. Starting then with the first round, 7 minutes, Mr. McKinnon.
Bonjour, Monsieur Deneau,
Good morning, Mr. Deneau, and welcome. As a member from Gatineau, I'd like to welcome you here. I noted your conclusions with respect to the lack or the void, vacuum, the international vacuum that's been created over the years when it comes to cooperation between countries, between jurisdictions, in order to fight the very existence of these jurisdictions that serve as tax havens through their legal framework. We have headquarters there for entities that do not want to pay tax. That being said, over the past few years, efforts have been made through the OECD, through the G20 and other entities, and Canada participated in this work. I'd like you to hear your observations about the efforts made. How do you see it? And how do you think that Canada is defending itself well through these bodies? And what other efforts or measures are needed in order to increase Canada's participation in such efforts, or to ensure that Canada is able to better cope with this situation? Thank you. The BEP measures are encouraging, but not completely satisfactory, because some basic mechanisms are not being dealt with. The patent boxes. Patent boxes enable companies to avoid paying taxes by transferring to subsidies to tax havens, by transferring intellectual property, to thereby ensuring, and here I'm talking about a multinational corporation, for instance, the brand for this group will become the intellectual property of a subsidy in this accommodating state, and therefore royalties will go back to the other members of the multinational group. So they're putting as much capital as possible in the accounts of the tax haven. So that's something that has not been raised in the deliberations, in the BEP deliberations. We know full well that the transfer price for multinationals is done this way. And so we have to deal with the very structure of the whole system. This was not raised, and the whole issue of confidentiality or secrecy, the whole principle of automatic exchange of information, tax information between countries. It's a huge problem when it comes to secrecy. We have to be able to put the finger on certain fraudulent companies, because some companies have given themselves the appearance of legality through their bank accounts, but it's not really, it's true. So they've been able to concoct a very evasive structure, so citizens have no way of monitoring public authorities. And we see through the various issues that have happened. CRA lately has pointed this out, and I think this is very relevant. I know that Canadian for Tax Fairness has issued a report which you find controversial, but we have to have proper monitoring. We know that, politically speaking, there may be meddling in public authorities, and if there's no mechanism to ensure that when a government receives information about a company or about players that have great fortunes, everything is done anonymously, and there's a problem there. I won't say any more about that, but Canada, up till now, has not been the strongest advocate. I talk to my partners on the international scene, and Canada doesn't have a very good reputation when it comes to taking measures to avoid tax avoidance. We are hoping the situation will change now. Canada gives the impression of acting in a very uncoordinated fashion. So we're claiming to deal with tax havens by being active in the OECD, but Canada shares its seat with 12 tax havens at the International Money Fund. So the Canada, when it comes out and says that it is doing something, it says on behalf of. We're talking about 11 tax havens here, including the Caribbean countries. And in my book here, I talk about examples where the Canadian government has officially pleaded for tax havens whose mandate it is to do its bit. To start with, the Canadian Revenue Agency has seen an increase in receivables. If we were to ask the agency this question, they'd say yes. We have a lot more receivables because it's thanks to the efforts we've made to recover money, to fight against tax avoidance on the international scene. So that's created more receivables. I think we're talking about $30 billion, if I'm not mistaken, this year alone. So we've invested considerable money, $440 million in the CRA, in the hope and on the assurances of the agency that there will be staff. There will be more staff, and as a result, the agency will be in a better position to deal with the issues that you've observed. That, I agree, does not deal with all the issues that you raised with respect to intellectual property and e-commerce, but the agency is claiming that it is now able to improve its performance in collecting taxes in Canada. Would you agree with that statement? There's room for improvement when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being circulated in tax havens. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, but once again, if the CRA has 100 extra auditors, and we have to mention the fact that the agency did, in fact, at one point suffer a lot of cutbacks, so now we're just getting it back up to where it was. So we can doubt that the agency has all the terms it needs to conduct monitoring operations on the accounts of wealthy individuals. But this is a global problem, and the wealthy, the uber-wealthy, constitute an important percentage of people who defraud the system, but we're legalizing, or we're losing control, depending on the case, on a certain number of transactions conducted by multinationals. And if you don't deal with that particular issue, I think what you're saying is they're able to deal with the margins of the problem, but they're not dealing with the very crux of the issue. And now, if we had invested in this earlier, we would be much more ahead of the game. And what about the transactions with Barbados? There was unacceptable number of transactions done here. This double taxation accord was totally unacceptable. So you have a state that has a tax rate of 0 to 0.1%. When it's 30% here, you can just imagine the impact.
Over time, Mr. McCollum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here. To kind of pick up on what my colleague across the table was originally going at is the efforts that have been made internationally to combat this tax evasion situation, and the kind of agreements countries have made to each other stem back several years, as well as some initiatives to clamp down on the enforcement side. And one recent report stated that that's resulted in $1.57 billion being recovered as a result of those efforts. And then the new government is putting more resources to build on that focus that was taken and to do more. My takeaway from what you've said so far is that you don't believe this is nearly enough. That your comments would lead me to think that that there's something missing. There's a disconnect on a much larger scale that you mentioned, that CRA and perhaps the senior people at CRA don't see it in a global context the way you do. Could you just expand a little further to help me understand that? We've had CRA officials here. They've told us the way that they manage and the way that they focus on this issue. How, in a practical way, would you say they should change what they're doing?
Disons que je ne suis pas totalement enfermé dans une réflexion qui porte exclusivement sur
not
ce que peut faire l'Agence canadienne du
just looking at what the CRA is doing. I'm saying the CRA is one of the vectors that we can use to deal with tax avoidance. I'm not trying to discredit the agency, but they're just dealing with the margins of the problem. There's a whole architecture, a whole structure involved with globalization. And this has been led by the Western countries back in the 90s, which explain the situation, the geopolitical situation in the world. And if there's one place where we could ask questions, it would be questions with respect to this very architecture or structure. I'll try to be as concrete as possible. There are two main problems. The first one pertains to the transfer of capital by individuals. Most often it's done legally. So when we're talking about someone who, we know that someone can't be in Belize, Luxembourg, whatever, all at the same time. But using this intergroup transfer system, there's a real problem there. We have a whole problem with a very structure of multinationals which really escape the control of the countries because of their multinational structure. They coordinate their activities, but they're not subject to any public control. So here I'm dealing with accommodating states. So individuals benefit from this structure through secrecy. You can name some people, but you're counting on secrecy to ensure that the CRA will ever be informed of the assets that are hid abroad. And that's where the problem lies, because there are current tax info exchange agreements, but you have to really attack at the levers of secrecy. I think that's one major issue which also requires a diplomatic solution. And even if we do get an automatic exchange of information, certain legislation such as Hong Kong, they're not even obliged to have registers in their country. So even if we could remove this banking secrecy, if we could remove it, you saw what happened with Panama Papers. We saw a concrete example there. We have documents, but there are no traces of the actual holders of these property deeds. We don't even know with this. And the legislation doesn't compel the country or to hold such a register. So even though we're able to remove the banking secrecy, the information won't help us. So we need a political solution. We have to have a comprehensive diplomatic political solution. And as far as corporations are concerned, the government of Canada promoted or encouraged tax havens.
This may not relate totally to your area of expertise, but I bring it up as another area of missed opportunity at times in terms of government revenues, and that's the underground economy that happens in this country. And cash, working for cash is another way to say it. Some people call it the black market. A study I'm aware of in the mid-90s in the housing renovation industry estimated at $6.9 billion of lost revenue annually to the building and construction industry. Do you have any views on how we might recover more of that unpaid tax where people are having their shingles replaced on their roof or their driveway redone, and it's all done on a cash basis? Is it a big problem in your mind?
Oui, la question est pertinente.
The question is relevant. A few years ago, I published a report. I don't remember what the exact title was, but I published this paper, and it said that there is expertise that exists at the federal and provincial levels on this matter because the main targets of the federal and provincial ministries of revenue have been underground market workers, little restaurants in the neighborhoods. They've really looked at the underground economy of small operations, but never, or nearly never, and I went through all the documentation about the multinationals and wealthy individuals who are involved with this underground economy. So we've only been looking at the underground economy over the past number of years. But they're looking at the little tiny people who are big players, but they don't do much about the big players. So I think it's up to the Department of Finance to deal with this. And there's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of documentation about the fact that it isn't very much about these people who commit huge fraud. Mr. DeSalle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'm disappointed in seeing Mr. Amersley, who refused our invitation. That's a dangerous precedent for a committee. Since now that this man no longer works for KPMG, his opinion to explain the role of KPMG in all of this. But I'd like to ask you a question, Mr. Deneau, who agreed to visit us today, about facilitators for tax avoidance. The accounting firms promote or advertise their tax products. They call this that. They call them tax products, where they offer wealthy clients for a considerable amount of money some tax products that, and it's clearly indicated in the advertising that the purpose is to avoid paying taxes. They don't hide anything. They're very open about the fact that the very purpose of these products is to allow their clients to pay less tax. Would you like to comment on what the government and what parliamentarians could do to deal with this situation. Those facilitators that come up with these tax products who come out and clearly state that the whole purpose is to avoid paying taxes. They're doing this in a legal way, and if they do this legally, well, we've been very accommodating because the government's even legalized certain processes because it may suit the wishes of some very wealthy people in the country. If I may, I'm trying to find it in my papers. I'm trying to recall the names of a Minister of Finance who was very influential in this country, and he created a consortium, and he sits as a former advisor. It's for people who he puts people with people such as Baring Gould, Bank of Scotiabank, Shell. He's not a tax burster. He's not a sociologist. These are business people who became advisors to the minister. So you understand why this is happening. Why is there so many abnormalities? I'd like to go back to the main issue that you raised. If in countries such as Bermuda's, Panama, have they legislated on capital on activities that have not been conducted in their territory, but here, well, we now have the rise of experts in delocalization that are going to say, oh, they're Canadians. So they're going to say that these people have assets in Canada. They're present here. They've been living here for a long time, they say, and they put all of this in a glass bubble, and it comes under Bermudan or Panamanian law. So these are assets that don't belong to any legislation because in these legislations, they feel that it's not part and parcel of the real economy of the country. So we've created this system of law that doesn't really deal with anything. So these experts are the ones that are pulling the reins for these tax havens. These tax havens were created in the British Caribbean countries by Canadians, and a former Minister of Finance, Dennis Fleming, who modified the tax haven legislation back in the 60s. And the Royal Bank was involved as well. There was Jim McDonald from the Caymans. He did just more or less the same thing. And everyone was working together with Canadian banks who have had a long-standing history with these tax havens. They've become these experts in transferring assets to these countries from our country. I'd also like to ask you a question about the contradiction in the message sent by Canada internationally, which on the one hand says that Canada is working hard and dedicating resources to put an end to tax avoidance, but on the other side, we have tax havens for mining companies even on our own territory, and we have tax agreements with what you call accommodating states, such as Barbados, where there is an agreement to put an end to double taxation. So we have to tighten our rules when it comes to mining companies, don't you think, so that we're not simply creating tax havens for them? And in our dealings with other accommodating states. That's a huge question, and I'd have to give you a whole seminar on the approach we need to take. The accommodating states have their own area of expertise. So Guernsey doesn't do the same thing as Liberia, or the Turks at Cayman have their own area of expertise. So each accommodating state has created mechanisms which enable powerful actors to transfer money outside of their own legislation and to benefit from this laissez-faire attitude. Canada has developed mixed accommodating state systems as have other countries such as the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, United States, Austria. Canada has developed a legislation which is a real regulatory haven on the world scene. Mining company, there are 3 out of 4 of the mining companies are Canadian, and 75% of the world mining companies are Canadians, and these are built with capital from here, but it deals with also foreign investors who develop in mines developed elsewhere. And I talked about this in another book that I wrote about tax havens. But now what we can do is dismantle some things. Canada, through its tax regulations, has a section 5907.11, which says that when Canada signs a tax agreement with a tax haven, Canadian corporations can transfer assets to this haven, and they can be repatriated, providing that dividends are paid. So Panama launders money more than any other country in the world. Canada signed a free trade agreement with Panama, particularly an agreement that deals with commercial exchanges. So Panama, Canada is sometimes complacent in this whole system.
We've been running over in all the questioners this morning. Mr. Sabera, before you do, could you explain to me what you meant by patent box? In an earlier question from Mr. McKinnon, you mentioned patent box, and I'm wondering what do you mean by that?
C'est une structure qui favorise
a structure that promotes the transfer of capital in accommodating states in order to enable a group to avoid or to bill other subsidiaries that come under its authority. So this deals with patents or intellectual property, and that's the most usual way that they make such transfer. A company has a brand. A brand is worth a great deal of money. And it's worth a lot of money, and a patent box promotes or enables them to not pay taxes or to pay very few taxes on transfers that pertain the right to use a brand when a multinational, for instance, has anything to do with intellectual property rights, and then they can bill royalties to the other components of the multinational group so that they can transfer more assets to that subsidiary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bienvenue. I do want to first comment before I ask a question. In our budget, we have dedicated over $400 million into Revenue Canada to combat tax avoidance and tax evasion. I think it was a large step forward and built upon prior measures, which I think is great. And I've always commented myself that Canadians should have confidence in our tax system, that everyone's paying their fair share and no one group is subsidizing another group. Here in Canada, we have very valued social programs that Canadians pay for and care about, and we need to make sure ensure those, and having an efficient tax system and confidence in our tax system is very important. I do wish to ask you a question on maybe a perceived or tax gap that exists in Canada. I believe there's a study or two going on about that, and just about how important it is for us to get a good understanding and an estimate of how large this tax gap is in Canada currently.
C'est une question absolument intéressante.
It's a very interesting question. Given my field of study, I feel that this tax gap that you've referred to cannot be analyzed comparatively. There are mathematical formulae involved. I think we're now in experiencing an exponential dynamic. Canadian corporations have invested about $200 billion in the 10 tax havens, the 10 main ones. I won't go back to the statistic, which I think is actually being underestimated, but the fact remains that this money, this money is not taxed. So once this is done, in order to, and I talk about ministers of finance who use this type of expression to refer to capital that's not transferred to others. In Canada, the federal and provincial legislatures have decreased the tax rates for corporations. Federally, it was 38% back in 1991. Now it's 15%. So there's been, which means that less money is going back into the public treasure. But there's capital that's leaving the country through tax avoidance, but the capital that remains is taxed at a lower rate, and it's exponential. So we don't meet the budget. We can't live within the budget. So we have debts with financial organizations that have a bigger tax rate, and so then we have to service the debt, and then there's a linkage between tax avoidance and the situation of countries where they have to service all these debts. So it's a universal problem for citizens. So when you undercut, you cut public services because not enough money is going back into the public coffers. So this is an indicator. It's a sociological indicator. There are a lot of issues involved, and we pay a high price as a group of people, as citizens, because of all these accounting transfers that are very, very difficult to calculate, but they're real all the same.
Follow-up. A quick question. I would have to just comment on the tax rates, where they were at and where they've now come down to, and I would obviously argue differently and say that lower tax rates have spurred on investment in capital and job creation here in Canada. That's my personal view, and this has been done in both Liberal and prior Conservative governments. And I would advocate that corporate tax rates are at a good level. They currently are at the level they're at. But I will have to ask, when you talk about the transfer of capital to these tax havens, are you saying that there are a number of Canadian corporations that have practiced this? Or are they doing it via transfer pricing? Are they doing it via this patent box? If you can just elaborate on that, because we have, our government and other governments have entered in a number of agreements with multinational entities regarding corporate governance and taxation issues, and we made a lot of progress on that front. And I would argue that a lot of Canadian corporations, which are employing literally tens of thousands of Canadians across this country, are good corporate partners, are good partners for their communities and so forth. Thank you.
Un point sur votre remarque.
One thing you said, indeed, corporations have more money to invest when the rate is lower. That's why there is $630 billion in their bank accounts here and abroad. It is a great sum of money. Corporations have a lot of cash flow, and they don't necessarily invest. And when they do, it's on the hedge funds in the Cayman Islands or other hedge funds or venture capital funds. It has no interest for the Canadian population. When they invest in countries, Bangladesh, China, India, Jamaica, in these tax-free areas, and we consume these products here in Canada. I forgot the question.
Can I pass the remainder of my time on to the Secretary?
Monsieur Deneau, d'abord, merci de nous faire.
Deneau, thank you so much for being here today. I'm listening you carefully with a lot of interest. And you're bringing to this discussion a philosophical aspect, which is very interesting. We have to think about these greater issues. I have two comments. You talked about the intervention of the Prime Minister of Canada in relation to the Panama Papers. I think that the Prime Minister was clear. Not only did we invest historical amounts of money in our budget way before the Panama Papers were known or were talked about in the media. I would like to tackle two issues with you, philosophically and intellectually. You said that you don't favor these out-of-court settlements. This is a regular practice internationally, not only for taxation issues, but in the majority of cases when there is a problem between taxpayers, it is solved out of court because it is quicker. We can find a settlement more rapidly, be it in criminal law or otherwise. So we have these out-of-court settlements so that it be more efficient, because it's not always easy to have a reasonable doubt. Secondly, I've worked or lived abroad for several years, and when I was in Europe, European states preferred the return of capitals in their countries once it's part of the tax base of a country, of a given country. Then we can tax it. Mr. Champagne, can you?
Vous comprenez mon point, c'est qu'une fois qu'on l'a ramené, on sera en mesure de le taxer.
If we get these capital gain back, we can tax them. That's what European countries did for insuring of capital, to make sure that we have these in the future.
You've asked a lot of questions. First of all, I'd like to point out, I remembered the question put by your cousin. Yeah, of course, Canadian corporations say that it's legal. They make these transfers because they're legal. We hear about this every day. Jean-François Lecoutier from the Journal de Montréal, it's not a difficult article. He says that every week that there's something that explodes about tax havens. So out-of-court settlements, yes, they're being challenged. And we're very concerned about the fact that the trend is depriving us of forming a case law, and we do this on a piecemeal basis, and often when we try to mediate things, we end up abdicating, and that's how we wind up with these out-of-court settlements. And if you want to talk about it philosophically, we'll have a huge debate there. But this is a very important component to consider. I don't want to attack the Prime Minister. I would simply say that most countries in the world are very interested in the very architecture of tax havens, not only in terms of administrative measures. It's encouraging that the new government is investing in the Canadian Revenue Agency. But there were so many cutbacks made prior to that. Now the agency has such small tools to deal with such huge problems. And we prefer to go through the Prime Minister's office or the Minister of Finance to deal with problems. And these measures just are not adequate. And as far as Europe is concerned, there's a whole societal debate going on. Luxembourg in Europe is using tax revenues throughout the EU. They're putting their profits, they make their profits somewhere, but they're registered somewhere else, so it's very difficult for taxpayers. We're very far from getting an answer to this problem.
Thank you very much. At the very beginning of your speech, there's a lot of mixed messages in different directions, and led me to believe, or to the conclusion, that what's happening with tax haven is more political than anything. And if that's the case, and if that's what you're suggesting truly, that means no matter how much money we invest in CRA, the result is going to be the same. Is that correct?
Non, c'est pas ce que je dis qu'il s'agit d'une approche.
No, I was saying that we need to take a complementary. We're just dealing with the margins of the problem when we allow CRA to put the finger on a few people who are defrauding the system. That's progress, yes, but we've not really looked at the basic problems, the banking secrecy, the automatic transfers of funds, and where information is no available. Panama Papers show that there are a lot of files that have so many false names that we don't know who are the really people who are the rights holders. We are not taking adequate measures to deal with this. We're just dealing with one little aspect of the problem. If you want to deal with the whole issue of tax avoidance, we have to, of course, look at the staff at the CRA, but their legislations have to be changed. We have to have we have agreements that we've signed with Barbados and other tax havens, so we have to look at that. There are some things that can be resolved in another way.
Just as I gather, that means you're looking at the change of policies, which means that you're suggesting that we're probably living on an island, and we have nothing to do with the rest of the world, so we can do whatever we want as Canada. And leading to that, that means there's other consequences to how to develop such measures and such policies. Don't you see any problem by doing so?
Non, mais évidemment, je dis exactement le contraire. On est
I'm saying the opposite. We're living in a world where the witnesses last week said the same thing. Canada is lagging behind. If you look at the world scene and in the measures taken to combat tax avoidance, the United States is miles ahead of us. Some companies have transferred their headquarters to Canada because of our complacent rules. So we're playing a very minor role in dealing with tax havens. We're not involved in this international movement to look at what the United States is doing, and here I refer to FACTA, where there's obligatory disclosure with respect to the transactions involved in order to have a better control of banking operations that take place in France or in tax havens. We have lots of examples of countries that are taking a lead role in this, and Canada is really far behind this movement, and the time has come that it step up to the plate and be part of this movement.
You've got time for another question if you want it.
Lisa, you want?
Okay.
I can go.
Go ahead. One more, Mr. Oblutov.
So the bottom line is what I hear is that don't you think that if we do such a policies as you've been suggesting, that we will scare off the investments that come into Canada, and will scare the multinational corporations or enterprises from coming and investing and working and putting actually their head offices here and be part of the Canadian business at large?
On est à des années-lumière de faire.
We're light years away from doing what the U.S. is doing right now. And as far as I know, there is not a huge exodus of capital leaving the United States going elsewhere. Canada has a tax rate, corporate tax rate, which is one of the lowest in the OECD. There are reasons why we're not taxing corporations the same way as Germany or United States is. There's no reason why corporations are moving their headquarters to Canada. We're not yet there yet, and rather than going into the ideology and I think we have to look at reality in front of us and see what's taking place in other countries.
Thank you both. Ms. O'Connell, last series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony today. I want to kind of ask a couple questions and summarize. I don't think there's a question or doubt based on the testimony we've heard that there were severe cuts to CRA in the past that have led to, I think in your words, based on translation certainly, that we've fallen behind or we're not quite ahead or where we should be in comparison to other countries around the world on dealing with tax evasion. But I guess where I'm having difficulty in your testimony is that it almost gives the impression like we're continuing the ways of the past, of doing nothing and turning a blind eye. But when I look at the investment to CRA, and I recognize in your testimony it's not just CRA, it has to be a more global approach to this. But when I look at CRA and the investment made there, In addition to the money, there was actually a committee formed, the Offshore Compliance Advisory Committee, and the initial focus are going to be on the following: strategies to help alleviate and discourage offshore noncompliance, administrative policies being used by other tax administrations to address this global issue, advice to the CRA in moving forward with its measures of measurement of the tax gap, additional strategies and practices related to promoters of tax schemes, and potential ways to improve the CRA's criminal investigation functions. Isn't that essentially what you're asking for, is what we're moving forward with? But we don't have all the answers because, for example, we've had years of cuts to the CRA in this regard. But we're moving forward in that direction, but we're getting the international as well as local experts to provide the specifics and the strategies needed to implement the very policies you're speaking of.
I agree with you, and what I would add is that, in my opinion, we must not look at tax havens as just being something horrible that's happened to us. We, as Canadians, have generated this problem. The not the free trade agreement, but the double taxation agreement that Canada signed with Barbados back in 1980, and which will be voted on at the House of Commons through the initiative of Gabriel Saint-Martin. This agreement promotes tax havens. It makes them legal. This is one way that the government has taken that has ended up causing the problem. We were not compelled to make this agreement. There was no reason for signing an FTA with Panama. And so in addition to what you have said, and which are encouraging measures, we have to have a clear diagnosis about our policies and the active responsibility of Canada in creating the very problem. So we have to dismantle what we've done. I think that this double taxation agreement with Barbados is something that's very important. That is the second biggest. Canadians invest in the Barbados more than any other country, with the exception of the USA. So Canada voluntarily signed this agreement with Barbados, and this led to this whole tax avoidance. And that's one of the problems that we have the courage to deal with now.
Thank you. Last question, Ms. O'Connell. Thank you. Again, I don't disagree, and the errors of the past don't preclude the good work that I think is happening now and into the future to deal with this. I guess my last point, I want to touch on the tax gap, because I think until we as Canadians really understand what that tax gap is, how can we actually aggressively combat it? And I know that previous calls to have the tax gap produced by CRA was stonewalled in some media reports. That's their language. How important is it in CRA's initiative in terms of the measurement of the tax gap and that being released in the work moving forward?
Je préciserai simplement que
I would simply say that the double taxation agreement is a mistake that we make on a daily basis. One day we have to put an end to it. It's a modern day problem because Barbados is the second largest country where Canadians invest in. I alluded to the sociological method, which would be complementary to a mathematical approach, which will deal with the issue, because the more tax havens attract Canadian money or other money or attract the wealthy, the more we will have a lower amount of taxes or coming in, and then we'll have higher public debt, then we'll have to pay for servicing the debt. So that shows what type of approach we need to take to these very complicated problems. It's a sociological problem, and I advocate for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deneau. There's a lot of information given. In fact, I think there's some reading maybe required in terms of some of the broader issues relating to taxation. Yes.
Vous avez fait allusion à.
You showed us a book, I believe. Could we get the title of that book? Paradis. It's about the role Canadians played in creating tax havens in the Barbados. And in English, it's Canada, a New Tax Haven.
And we will suspend for 5 or 7 minutes and come back to committee business. Thank you. Everybody's here. Can we reconvene to committee business? Go ahead. You're allowed, Ms. Raitt. What I'd suggest we do is we have, I think, we have a motion. And we have to determine where we're at on the KPMG study in terms of getting it, getting a report drafted, time to discuss recommendations, and when we table it. And we really have to deal with the pre-budget consultations budget for that for the fall. So the way I'd suggest we proceed is first on KPMG, I'll ask Michael to outline where we're at. I know the analysts and the library have been working pretty steadily to try and get a draft prepared. So Michael, if you can.
Yes. We have already been working on a draft of the report based on the testimony that was provided during the previous meetings. We have sent parts to translation already and are working to finalize other parts. We will need to add to what we have prepared the testimony provided today, and we're aiming to provide the committee with a draft report in both languages either next Monday or Tuesday, depending on translation and formatting, which would allow the committee, if the committee wishes to do so, to meet on the 23rd to provide comments and feedback and review the report.
Mr. Caron?
Yep.
And I'd remind people we still are public and still are televised.
Merci beaucoup, et merci beaucoup aux analystes.
Thank you very much to the analysts for the excellent work. Do you need a motion to ask the analysts to include in their analysis in the report a section dealing with the current situation and the impact that it has on the witnesses or the number of testimonies, looking at the scope of the convention with respect to the situation that we have here? I think that this would be very interesting because we've never dealt, we don't deal with this situation very often. I don't have any memory of this happening, and I think that it would be very important for future studies, because if we want to look at the whole issue of tax havens, we've not yet dealt with the Panama Papers, so it would be very important to know about the case law, the conventions. We'd be interesting to know the constraints and powers of the committee, if in fact there are constraints. So you can see where I'm headed. I think that it should be part of our report, and this is something that we have been dealt with that we're dealing with now directly.
Mr. Caron, you mean the difficulty of a committee dealing with an issue when it's also at the same time before the courts? That's, in simple terms, that's what you mean?
Oui, effectivement.
And also the difference between the situation where something's before the Supreme Court or some other court, the tax court, the federal court. It would be good to have the report contain an analysis or even offer a solution about what we should do if we want to continue studying the issue.
Yeah, well, I think it is up to it's up to the committee when we get a draft to determine what further we may want in that report. If I guess if we get too extensive, we wouldn't be able to table it until fall with the recommendations that I think we would want as well. But be as it may, that's where we're at, Mr. McKinnon.
Je suis d'accord, certainement qu'on devrait.
I agree. We should note the decision made further to the legal advice we received. Namely, we asked witness to limit his statement and to not discuss the KPMG affair. I don't know why, however, we would take up most of the report with this issue. It seems to me that that's a completely different issue. And I don't think we should take a lot of space in this report to deal with that rather than focus on the issue before us, namely the efforts taken by CRA in order to combat tax evasion and avoidance. Yes, we should note it, maybe an asterisk for posterity's sake, and then go back, as my colleague suggested, but I don't think we need an in-depth analysis given the legal advice we received. It's not a decision, it's a convention. We were told to be careful. It limited the type of questioning. It put constraints on the types of witnesses we could hear from. We had one witness who decided not to appear because of this convention. In all honesty, with such constraints, I'm wondering, given how serious this problem is, how can we state that we've got to the bottom of this KPMG issue, given the scarcity of answers or the lack of in-depth answers that we got from representatives from the KPMG or those who were reluctant to talk about it? The whole sub judicia note or document put limits on us, and these were questions that were very pertinent to tax evasion or avoidance, the very mandate of our committee. So if we don't talk about the impact of this convention on the way that the convention was used, or there will be no way that this committee will be able to, regardless of the subject, or effectively, to deal with the whole issue of tax havens or aggressive tax avoidance. We have a duty. We have powers that are greater than the professional secrecy that or the relationship that a lawyer-client has. I'm not saying that we have to use this power, but it just shows the scope of our authority, and limiting ourselves to simply accepting the recommendations made by a convention poses a problem and has an impact on the effectiveness of our work. I'm not saying that this analysis should take up 3/4 of the report, but we should talk about the situation we found ourselves in, the problems raised by the legal experts, I need to have information on what our work is, and we discussed this at the last meeting when the parliamentary budget officer was here. We acknowledged that this whole sub judice problem was not well understood by the committee, not all the ins and outs of it at any rate, and we don't know what it means for our work, particularly in the case of tax havens or tax evasion or avoidance.
I wonder if we could at our next meeting, when we have the draft, further this discussion and whether it is possible to to do either as part of the report or as a separate report our experience with this one. Part of the problem here, and I've certainly felt it as chair. I mean, some of the advice is to go in camera. I think if we'd have went in camera, we would have missed some very good evidence at both this meeting and the last meeting. But we are also bound by the rules of Parliament, and it does make it very difficult for a parliamentary committee to get into the specifics of a certain issue that may be before the courts. And so maybe we can examine that a little further. Like I wonder how far you can stretch the testimony to avoid the sub judice convention. But in any event, can we further this discussion? We ask the analysts to do what I know there may be some problems in terms of getting it through translation, but to see what they can prepare for us so that we could look at a report on a week from Thursday. It could be to committee on Tuesday, and then we could discuss it on Thursday. It would be nice if we're able to have them recommendations, the recommendations we might do for Parliament, so they would be available, and then look at this other issue as well. So we can talk about that on Thursday. Okay, agreed? Sorry, Michael?
Just to clarify, we did mention issues with respect to this sub judice convention. We didn't provide an exhaustive list, but I think we could include an analysis in the draft for next week. We'll at least allude to the issue. And then at that point, the committee can decide what it wants to do.
Mr. McCall?
I believe we moved on from that issue then, and we're decided on that. I'd like to table a motion, Mr. Chair, and I have it in both official languages. It has to do with committee business.
Okay.
Can I pass it around?
Yep.
Thank you.
And so this is for notice, right?
No, it's for discussion right now.
Would you permit me to go to the pre-budget consultations first and then come back to that?
Yes.
Because
yes.
I have to go before liaison committee at 1 o'clock.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
And then we'll agree to that next.
Right.
Okay. The pre-budget consultations, you do have a budget before you.
4 budgets.
4 budgets before you. Okay. All right. And this is all related to the pre-budget consultations. Mr. Leipert.
Mr. Chairman, since we had the preliminary discussion a couple of weeks ago, I've been giving a fair bit of thought to what we have in front of us. And I would like to make a case that we consider a slight alteration, but maybe some would consider it more significant. The reality of our committee, Mr. Chairman, is that we have one member on this committee from the 3 Western provinces, and with all due respect, the province of Prince Edward Island has as much representation on this committee as the 3 western provinces do. In fact, one could say even maybe a little more, since the member from Prince Edward Island is the chair of the committee.
Chair. Or vice chair.
We also have 5 members, and I'll say this publicly, 5 members who are within about a 3-iron from Pearson International Airport. I would like to propose that the committee consider spending 1 week in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, 1 week in Manitoba, Ontario, and 1 week in Quebec and Atlantic Canada. I believe it would give a better representation of certainly some of the issues that I think Western Canadians are dealing with in these times, and probably would give this committee, many of whom are not as familiar with Western Canada as I would like them to be, a better sense of some of the challenges that we are facing. So I don't think it would significantly alter the budget, but it would change where I would like to see us divide our time. Thank you.
Just so I'm clear, I might have missed a point, Ron. You said 1 week in BC on its own?
No, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan.
Okay, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Okay. Okay. I actually think, and Mr. Caron as well, I'll come to you, but I think you're right in terms of the numbers of the overall budget at the end of the day. Your proposal is not going to change that budget much. I do want to go, before I go to you, Mr. Caron, because we do have a considerable problem whether or not we can travel or not. Which might make this point moot, but I still believe very firmly that as a committee we need to propose what we believe would do the best service to Canadians in terms of hearing their view on pre-budget consultations, and I expect that as being in their regions and understanding and gaining a little understanding of that region. I know, as having been a witness before committee myself, you're much more comfortable in making your point of view in your own region, and I think we have an obligation to do that if we can. But we do have a letter from the chair of the subcommittee of the liaison committee, which is basically saying at the moment, with the potential requests expected to come in, represents about 145% of the global envelope for committee activities for this fiscal year. And so there's certainly pressure on, and I'll just read this line, quote, "If travel is necessary, the committee should set out clear objectives for a potential trip and plan in advance to the greatest extent possible, including foreseeing all travel plans for a study." And there's also emphasis in the letter that we look at video conference as much as possible. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with in terms of putting our budget proposal to the centre. And the difficulty for the subcommittee on liaison on the budgets is that committee is allocated a budget, and we have to stay within that budget. So that's the reality we're facing. But having said that, we can put forward options if we so decide. Mr. Caron, then Mr. Liebert.
That's what I wanted to point. If we can travel, which is not a given, I wonder if Mr. Liebert would agree that we cannot ignore the North. This should be included in the list. Should we be able to travel? The week for BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan could also include the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. And the week for Manitoba and Ontario could include Nunavut. That doesn't force us to go, but at least we could consider the views of these people.
Mr. Lippert.
In looking through these budget documents, are we basing the budget on 7 members of the committee being at each one of these? Because I'm not sure that that's required.
One of the difficulties, and if anybody wants to come in here, come in. One of the regardless whether you have say 5 members or 7, 7 seems to be the balancing point. I mean, there's usually a motion that no motions can be made on when you're traveling anyway. So there's no partisan political games been usually played when you travel with reference to motions. But you do need an analyst. You need 2 analysts. You need 1 clerk. You need 1 logistics officer. You need 3 interpreters and 2 processing and verifications officers. So beyond your committee, Ron, and this is it rules of parliament or the negotiations with staff unions or whatever? So you got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
I'm not questioning the staff, Mr. Chair. I'm asking about the number of committee members, elected members, that would be on each one of these. It seems to me like 7 is probably more than we need, but I make.
Mr. Chair, I was going to go the other way. I actually, the added cost of taking the entire committee, and in this important round of pre-budget consultations, I would argue is a valid one. We're talking about the difference between 7 MPs and, if my math is good, it should be 10. You have the submissions here include all of the committee infrastructure in any event, and I, like Ron, don't question the requirement, the staff requirements that are envisaged here. But the difference between having the entire committee and a portion of the committee, to me, seems immaterial to the overall budget.
In any event, there's been a motion passed at the liaison committee that the maximum to travel with committees when it's traveling is 7. So I think that's a moot point on that one anymore.
Would a motion be in order for these budgets then?
Yes. Yes, a motion would be in order, and I think we could, just to get the numbers, and we can discuss at another time on committee business exactly how we want to lay it out. But I would think whether it's more emphasis what you're saying in the West, more video conferencing here, or whatever. With the locations, we're likely looking at basically pretty well the same locations, just more time in one area or another or not. Is that correct?
I don't think we have a problem with Mr.
So do we need
Lepper's
3
suggestion.
motions, Susie, or 1?
Well, you just adopt each budget.
Good. Okay. Well, this may impact what Ron was suggesting, but I think we can juggle with this somewhat. On the first motion, destination St. John's, Fredericton, Charlottetown, Halifax, are we agreed on the $84,963? Agreed? On the Kelowna, Edmonton, Regina, Winnipeg, are we agreed on the budget $89,138?
Agreed.
Agreed? And on the budget for Quebec City, Montreal, Windsor, Toronto, are we agreed on the budget for $67,225?
Agreed.
Agreed? And one more? Okay. And this is for the video conferencing meetings in Ottawa, etc. For to do the study as well for a budget amount of $37,500. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. And we'll add that all up and present it to the liaison committee, and I expect we'll be back. Okay. That's that out of the way. Phil, you have a motion.
Yes. I'm not sure if it's been circulated, but could it be circulated now? While it's being circulated, I'll read the motion and provide a little bit of rationale after I read it. Mr. Chair, here's the motion that I'm putting on the table, that the Standing Committee on Finance undertake a comprehensive study of issues surrounding the Canadian residential real estate market, that the study focus on the impact of the housing market on the Canadian financial system and challenges surrounding access to residential home ownership, that the committee report its findings and recommendations before the end of February 2017. Mr. Chair, this is a subject matter that obviously I have a very close connection to with my background before politics, but more importantly, the housing situation in this country in terms of home ownership is a very fragile situation, often going in many different directions very quickly. I think we're at a point right now in the scheme of things where, particularly in certain markets, where I think this committee should take a look at and try to write a report to the government that will give a better sense of the risks out there to the overall financial system. It's often mentioned by economists and others that the bellwether for the economy often is housing, and it's often the multipliers of housing. So I won't go on further other than I think it's a very important issue for this country, especially given the the seemingly there's no end in sight for the kind of in certain markets where prices are going, and this is affecting Canadians on many different levels, household debt levels, interest rates. They all play a factor in the financial markets, and I think that we'd be wise as a committee to study this. That's why I'm putting the motion on the floor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion is on the floor. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. McCollum, for the motion. As an individual who comes from a riding that in a city and representing a city of Vaughan that has the largest housing developer in Canada and probably a number of the largest developers in Canada for the housing market, I'm quite familiar with how important they are to the economy of Canada and how important they are. The housing market is important to the economy of Ontario. Mr. McCollum, I support this motion. I think I've received enough phone calls and emails from friends, be it Liberal, Conservative, New Democratic, on dealing with housing prices, how a teacher these days cannot afford to enter the housing market, and being a teacher is considered a good job with good benefits and good pay. I think it behooves us to undertake a study onto the risks within the housing market itself, some of the bifurcation that's going on within the housing markets in Canada, to understand some of the trends that we're witnessing in terms of accessibility, prices, and so forth. So I put my support behind this motion.
Mr. Caron.
I also support the motion and the intention behind it. The only question I have for Mr. McCollum is, can he give us an idea of the number of meetings he feels is necessary to really get a good grasp of the situation?
To be honest, Mr. Caron, I haven't given that consideration. I would be happy to kind of lay out a plan over the next short while and get back to you on that. There are many players in the housing industry. They involve obviously all the financial institutions. They involve all the layers of people who provide housing, plus all the layers of the ripple effect that, it's said in the industry that there's a 10 times multiplier on when someone buys a house. It affects the economy people are buying furniture, they're buying all these other things, and it all is a huge multiplier. That's why the kind of the that characterization that it is a bellwether industry. But I will get back to you in terms of that. But I would suggest to you that if we put this on our schedule, we'll be able to do it by the end of February for sure.
Okay, are we ready for any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, then turning to Mr. Caron's motion, right? Ron, can you chair? I have to go to liaison. Okay, Mr. Caron, go ahead.
Alors donc,
I'll read it very quickly. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Finance undertake a study on the benefits and potential impacts of introducing a guaranteed minimum income, and that the committee report its findings to the House by Friday, February 17, 2017. The intention behind this motion, I settled on February 17, 2017. It doesn't conflict with the tabling of the budget, which occurs in February, in beginning of March. It's a motion that is similar to that was previously translated. I would like to know whether people are open to this.
This has to be accepted at least as something we can vote on. And the reason is that when this motion, initial motion that I presented was voted down, it was with the understanding that a letter would be sent and Human Resources would actually take on the study of this issue. We haven't heard officially from Human Resources. I know I've spoken to members of the Human Resources Committee. They haven't even discussed or received officially the letter as a committee. So it's problematic. It seems that Human Resources does not put it as a priority to actually have this issue, which actually I think makes it relevant for it to come back to the Finance Committee, because we're talking about what such a guaranteed minimum income or basic income or whatever we want to call it would have as an impact. It will definitely have a financial impact. If we're studying during the budget issues of EI and issues of veteran affairs, which should have been discussed in those committees, I think this issue should actually be addressed by the Finance Committee. I'd like to remind also my Liberal friends on the committee that in convention of 2012 and the last convention that they had, the motion was actually adopted by their own members as well to study basic income and actually implement a basic income pilot. So I think it might actually be something that would be welcomed by the Liberal members of this committee. And I've seen also the proposal that Mr. Actually, I'll wait for this. I'm just thinking that right now we should make a decision to discuss it in finance, and if the members don't want to take the time in finance, we could actually go and strike a subcommittee to actually discuss the study outside of the realm of finance. I'm open to this possibility. I just want it to be addressed. I'm not even saying I'm in favor or opposed to it, but I think it's something that is being debated out there, and I think we should fulfill our responsibility to actually address this issue and give some questions some of the answers they deserve.
All right. There is a motion on the floor, and I'm told by the clerk that despite the earlier discussion we had, this motion is in order because it is different than the previous one. I think it needs to be put on the table, however, that the earlier motion, slightly different because it didn't include a date, has been referred to the Committee of Human Resources. It is my understanding that the Human Resources Committee has agreed to include the guaranteed minimum income as part of an overall study that it is undertaking. And so with that background, we're open for discussion. And I think Mr. McKinnon was...
Mais c'est un peu pour rejoindre Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, or Mr. Vice Chair, rather. With respect to your clarification, this committee decided to, or recommended rather, to the Standing Committee on Human Rights, on Human Resources, to undertake a study on this issue. I, like you, have been waiting for some news about what they intend to do, and I think we just got a good signal that the committee is prepared to examine the question. We don't know exactly how, but as far as I'm concerned, given the issues involved, and it's very close to pre-budget time, and the cost of housing in Canada is a huge issue, as is tax evasion. I'm sure that there will be other studies on this in future, and but once again, I'm inclined not to support on such a broad subject. I would add that this committee does not seem to be the appropriate committee to undertake such a study. So, Mr. Vice Chair, I will be voting against the motion.
Others? Mr. Ouellette and Mr. Carroll.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Vice Chair.
For me, when I think about the guaranteed income, this is important to people in my riding, and it's not. It's important not just simply because people want to get a free lunch, but we often talk about government programs and how they benefit people, but often those government programs are so hard to navigate in our system. We have so many different government programs, they're everywhere. And the idea of a guaranteed annual income or a negative income tax is to simplify the process and give people the resources directly that they need without having to go through a bureaucracy, without having to go through a specific application process in order to obtain those resources, and that they can then use those resources for the benefit that they see fit as autonomous individuals within a collective society. And I hate having to explain to individuals, they say to me, Robert, like, what are you doing for me? Like, I've got autism's disorder, or I've got fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum disorder. My mother was drinking, I'm Indigenous, I can't work, it's really hard. And what are you doing for me? Like, what programs do you have going on for me? And I have to say, well, you know what? We got the guaranteed or the child tax benefit. It's $5.40 a month, tax-free, and I don't have kids, Robert. Well, we have some housing programs and dollars that are coming. Yeah, but, housing, that there's a lot of people looking for housing, Robert. There's a lot of people looking for housing. What are you doing for me? And I think I have the floor, and I can speak for a long time.
Well, you can, unless I cut you off.
Really?
Robert, I'd like to try and get this motion dealt with. All of the points that you're making, I think, are very valid, but can we determine first whether the motion proceeds or not before you make the case relative to why we should have a guaranteed income program?
So we're discussing right now just
whether the motion proceeds or not.
Yeah, I think it should proceed. I think you've already made the decision that it's going to proceed.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
And it's not challenging you, Chair, but having been in your position, when a member has the floor, they have the floor. And it's Mr. Ouellette's within his parliamentary rights to speak as little or as long as he wants.
All right. I guess what I'm asking Robert is if he could try and summarize as quickly as he can so we can deal with this issue, or it won't get dealt with today.
Well, this is not going to be an issue that's going to go away. This is something that we're going to have to deal with eventually, because Finland is doing it, Brazil has been doing it, other countries have been doing it, Namibia has been doing it. This is an important issue around the world because people are asking about how we can best and be most productive with our tax dollars. Maybe Switzerland recently just talked about it, had a vote on it. And so when I think and I talk to my constituents about this issue, it's important to them because housing is $700, $800, $900, $1,000 in Winnipeg. It's not Toronto, it's not Vancouver, but a single apartment house in downtown Winnipeg is expensive. And when you only get welfare because you have, disabilities, you don't always fit the requirements and receive the income that you have. And I sometimes become afraid that in this place, that we become disconnected from the reality that are faced by many Canadians. We can say, oh, just work hard. You just, pull up your bootstraps and get on with it and do it, and if you work hard, you'll succeed. But, unfortunately in life, we're all come with different capacities, and not each and every one of us has the same mental capacity to become a Bay Street lawyer and successful, like my colleague Raj, whose family came from Punjab and worked hard and became successful and looked after their education. But they had something different. They had social capital. But when you don't have social capital, when you don't have any capital at all, what do? And we can say we're working at it, we're looking at it, but I think our job here in this place is to think extremely long term. And what I've heard in my discussions with the other members from the HUMA committee that we've asked to study this is they're going to look at this in a very small segment, maybe one day. But I think this requires a profound understanding of guaranteed annual income about what we should be doing. Because if you go online, if you just Google this and look at this on Wikipedia, for instance, the first model encompassing the guaranteed annual income is a negative income tax, meaning people under a certain level will receive a certain amount of money, and those above it won't receive anything. Then you have the guaranteed annual income model, which means that you will receive a certain amount of funds each and every year, no matter your income level. And this is important. How we do taxation. This actually hits the very heart of the way we do taxation. And we did this once before. We did this under Trudeau the Elder. Pierre Trudeau, they studied this in the 1970s, but we're now 1980, 1990, 2000, 2016. We're 40 years on from that pilot project. And we had a representative, Evelyn Forget, a doctor and economist in the health sciences who came to testify about this issue. Chair? And she talked about how it was important. And she talked about how we didn't actually see a reduction in the working hours, how people didn't become lazy, how it does have an impact on governments, how it can reduce costs for government over the long term, how it reduced health costs. And, whether we like it or not, Ontario right now is moving ahead with this. And so I sometimes ask, we can go to the other committee, the HUMA committee, the Human Resources Committee, and hope they have the expertise and the experts in the analysis, and they'll do a good job. But sometimes we also have the expertise here, the economists, the people who have been studying, financial arrangements and how they work.
Robert, I've got a point of order from Mr. Grill.
I understand the intent of my colleague. It's clear that on the Liberal side, the motion should not, they don't feel that this should be discussed at Finance, so I'd ask my colleagues to not vote on the motion today. I have 2 minutes, so I want to have the vote, but we need to vote out within 2 minutes. If we don't do it within 2 minutes, I want them that the members outside here. I would like the members outside of this room hear why it's so important, why it's not simply an item for one committee, because this is an issue that has effect on everybody in the House of Commons. It's a long-term issue. If we don't vote on it today, or we vote on it in September, the day we vote on it, I believe it's very important that all my colleagues understand this. We simply involve study matters that deal with taxes, because we are talking about taxation here.
How much should you tax someone? How much should someone receive? How much social programs? For instance, if you give guaranteed annual income to a student, and you decide then, well, you're getting guaranteed income, do you need the student loans anymore? Do you need to have student grants anymore? Should we eliminate that from some of the government programs? Do we eliminate those jobs and those people working in there? There's other issues related to our economy. Our economy is moving in a far different direction on guaranteed annual income, related to guaranteed income. Because if you think about our economy now, our jobs are moving offshore, they're moving to other places, and not everyone has the same levels of support We have seen a stagnation in a lot of cases in the types of employment, family income. You have to have 2 incomes now to work. And it's become more and more difficult for people to just simply get by. And I'm sorry, Guy, but I'm just, I'm really passionate about this because I have people coming up and asking me about this. Ils viennent à moi tout le temps pour demander.
Come to me all the time asking me, Robert, what are you doing? And I have to answer them. I want to at least say that I'm studying it, and I want to deal with this issue myself, and that's why it's so important. Yes, we can vote on it, but I want the people here understand why it's important to me. I want my colleagues to understand why it's so important to me. So we vote, but the problem is I want my colleagues to vote with me because it's not simply about me. There are people in the Liberal Party who believe in this. I was at the Congress at the last biennial, and they said yes the last time, back in 2016 in Winnipeg. They said it back in Montreal in 2014. They said yes.
Mr. Chair, I see the clock at 1 p.m. I would make a request that you call this meeting ended.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn.
Yep.
Those in favor? Please vote. Those in favor? Carried.
It takes unanimous consent to go on after one.
Okay, fair enough.